Hello, and thank you for joining us. A special greeting to IMLA members tuning in tonight. We'd also like to extend a warm welcome to members of the Italian Sons and Daughters of America and thank the ISDA for its support. Actor and comedian Tom Dreesen is best remembered as the opening act for Frank Sinatra. During his 50 years in show business, Dreesen has performed with giants such as Smokey Robinson, Liza Minnelli, Natalie Cole, and Sammy Davis Jr. He has made over 500 appearances on national television and more than 60 appearances on The Tonight Show. While Dreesen's path to a career in entertainment was anything but traditional, it was indeed groundbreaking and included many firsts, as we're about to discover in what is undoubtedly going to be a lively conversation this afternoon. Welcome, Tom. How are you feeling as we near the 1 year mark of the pandemic?
Yeah. Here I am in lockdown LA, I feel like I've been in jail for the last year because I haven't been able to go on the road, and I'm so used to heading for the airport, 2 or 3 times a month. And now, especially with the book out, I'm supposed to be on a book tour, but I can't even do that, so I can hardly wait.
This is part of your virtual book tour.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. This Zoom thing is all new to me now. Do I click share screen?
No, you don't worry about anything. Our wonderful staff is going to take care of all this. We can just kind of start chatting a little bit. If you're ready, we're ready.
I'm like Delta. I'm ready when you are.
Okay, so before we get started, we also want to mention to the audience tuning in tonight, if they have any questions for you, they're welcome to, just type those into the comments box of this Facebook Live feed. And then after our chat concludes, we're going to take some questions from the audience. So, let's kind of begin with a little bit about your upbringing, your childhood. You grew up on the south side of Chicago. What set you down the path of becoming a comedian?
I'll be honest with you, I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd ever be a stand-up comedian. I grew up, although I did enjoy telling jokes and stuff when I was a kid, but I went to Catholic school. Nuns do not, reward you for ad libs, So, but I had 8 brothers and sisters. I grew up in a suburb on the south side of Chicago called Harvey, Illinois, and there was 8 kids, 4 boys and 4 girls, and we were really poor. My father was alcoholic, and he nice man, very docile guy, but he drank a lot, and consequently, we lived in this shack that I always say, if a window broke, you stuck a rag in it. If you had holes in your shoes, you put cardboard in it. And so, but it was a microcosm of Chicago. I mean, it was steel mills and factories and taverns on every block, and they made the steel mills. They made everything from clutch plates to crankshafts, and they were blue collar people, hardworking people. And the mantra in my neighborhood when I was growing up is, "You only deserve in life what you work for." And so at 8 years old, I'm out with my brother, who was 3 years older than me, and we're going tavern to tavern, shining shoes in all the bars, and we sold newspapers on the corner, and then I had a paper route, and then later on I was a pin boy. I set pins in a bowling alley, and I caddied in the summertime, all to help feed my brothers and sisters. None of this do I regret. I think Marianne, I give motivation talks all the time. It's a passion of mine. I'm a stand-up comedian first, last, and always, but I've read literally hundreds of books on the powers of the mind. So I give motivation talks on 4 subjects: perception, visualization, self-talk, and develop a sense of humor. And I elaborate on those 4 points. And whenever I tell them about my poor childhood that I grew up in, I tell them that's the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because that's the way I perceive it. I perceive that built character and taught me how to, that if it is to be, it's up to me. I have that note still on my desk. If it is to be, it's up to me, because we didn't have a father with a lot of money, and we didn't have any wealthy relatives. If you were going to do it, you had to do it on your own. But anyhow, so while I was shining shoes in all those bars, some interesting things is that Frank Sinatra was on every jukebox in all those bars. And that's the first time I heard his voice, and so the book is basically about this little boy, the story of a little boy who was shining shoes in all the bars in his neighborhood, and hearing Frank Sinatra on the jukebox, and that one day this little boy from Harvey, Illinois, was carrying Frank Sinatra's coffin out of a church in Beverly Hills, California. So that's what the journey is from that little boy to, look at that little, how about that picture?
You haven't changed a bit.
Yeah, I haven't changed. But it was, I wasn't an unhappy childhood. I tell people all the time, I had 8 brothers and sisters, and both my parents were heavy drinkers at one time. And when you come from parents of alcoholic, the children bond, and years ago, I read a book a woman wrote about adult children of alcoholics. And I thought I was reading my diary, because there's things that you do, that are similar, but we bonded. I had brothers and sisters that I adored, my older brother, Glenn, taught me, when he went to shine shoes, he took me. When he went to sell newspapers, he took me. He went to set pins in a bowling alley, he took me. He was the one who taught me that work ethic, that I still have to this day.
So, pursuing a career as a comedian is not exactly what most working class kids do. I mean, most of the time they kind of look for something safe, right? Some safe, dependable source of income. How did you do it? Tell us about that process.
And by the way, that's exactly right. What you just said there. When I first told people I wanted to be a comedian, they said, "Are you out of your mind? What are you, crazy? Get a job, get a real job." But what happened was, by the time I was 16 years old, raggedy poor, I dropped out of high school, because going to high school, in those days, the kids dressed to the nines, and you always wanted to be cool. And I had none of those things. And, some kids had a car, their dad's car. My dad never owned a car. Thank God. The way he drank, he'd have ran some people over, but, by the way, I want to tell you one more quick story. When I was selling newspapers on the corner, there was one day where all the horns were blowing, and this is in my book too, but all the horns were blowing. I was 8 years old, and all the horns were blowing, and crowds were coming from everywhere. And I asked one of the elders, "What's going on?" They said, "It's Lou Boudreau Day, Tommy." I said, "Lou Boudreau?" They said, "Yeah, Lou Boudreau's from Harvey, and that he was the captain of the basketball team. They won a state championship. He then went on to college. He was a captain of Illinois basketball team. He was a baseball player. Cleveland Indians recruited him. He played shortstop for the Cleveland Indians, and at age 24 was the player manager, and they won the pennant in the World Series. And he's from Harvey, and we're honoring him." And I was so excited because somebody from Harvey was famous. I sold all my newspapers, and I ran down to the corner where I usually sold papers on 155th Street in Harvey, and across the street was the post office and the Elks Club. And all these people were all out in front of the Elks Club because Lou Boudreau was having lunch with some other celebrities, and he came out and he waved to everybody, and they got in the limousine and he drove away, and people were cheering and the band was playing. And as a little boy going home, I thought, wow, somebody from Harvey, Illinois is famous. And like little boys do, I fantasize, maybe one day they'll have a parade for me. And I pictured the band and all that stuff. And anyhow, on August 22nd, 1992, I went back to Harvey. And because, as you pointed out, I've done 500 appearances on national television, I mentioned Harvey on those shows. Well, they named that street, 155th Street, where I stood and saw Lou Boudreau. They named that street after me, Tom Dreesen Street. And the man who introduced me to the crowd was Lou Boudreau. So
full circle.
It's a full circle.
Full circle. Yeah, full and I think we have an image of that.
Yeah.
We have an image of that. So that's in Harvey.
Yeah, that's that. So in other words, dreams come true,
Absolutely, absolutely. So now the neighborhood that you grew up in, was it predominantly Irish, Italian? What was your neighborhood?
No, we lived in the poor side of town, and it was a lot of African American. I grew up around Black kids, and there was a little golf course not far from where I'd go ball hawking with them. They taught me how to black ball hawk. A guy would hit a ball over the fence, and you'd run and get it, and you'd go sell it back to the guy. So I grew up in a poor side of town, and it was all races and religions, but mostly it was predominantly Black where I grew up at. And then, but by the time I was 16, I dropped out of high school, and I started running with a pretty tough crowd. and getting in fights and stuff like that. Nothing I'm proud of. By the time I was 17, I went in the Navy. You know, I joined the Navy. My older brother had gone in the Navy, my older brother Glenn, and so I followed him. And that really helped change my life, because for the first time in my life, I was equal to everybody else. You know, they shave your head in boot camp, and everybody had the same clothes. You know, and they judge you by your merits and not by the clothing you wore or where you came from. You know, and also 3 squares a day, 3 meals a day. I grew up in that shack. We didn't have a whole lot, you know, to eat. You know, we rarely had meals. You know, because the parents were both gone sometimes, and my older sister Darlene would watch over us. And anyhow, so when I went to the Navy and they had 3 meals a day, I had never had that. That was amazing to me, you know, in my own bed, you know, clean sheets and all that stuff. It was really kind of a fascinating experience for me. And you know, from there, I went from, in the Navy, I went from boot camp in Great Lakes to Newport, Rhode Island, and Quonset Point, Rhode Island, where I was in a squadron, Nat 2 Naval Air Torpedo Unit. And then they put me in a Marine Corps unit. I served in the Marine Corps 9 months, training with the Marine Corps. And then I went aboard ship, the USS Tarawa and the USS Essex. And then my Navy career was over. And I came home, and I ended up getting married right away, and I had babies coming one right after the other. I ended up with 3 kids, but going from job to job, still not knowing what I wanted to do in life, you know, and feeling unfulfilled. Every job I had, I would do well, but then I'd get bored with it. You know, I was a photographer. My brother's a photographer. I worked with him. I was a private detective. My cousin, Don Polizzi, had a detective agent for him, private detective. I was a bartender always. I worked construction sometimes, pouring sidewalks and basements. I worked on a loading dock. I was a teamster. I loaded trucks and I became a teamster. Then I later dropped my card and I became manager. Now I'm foreman of these 44 tough Teamster union guys. That was an experience. But none of it was I fulfilled. And I was honestly praying at the time, God, what is it I'm supposed to be doing? This can't be it. I was sitting in a bar with my buddies at 2 o'clock in the morning, looking around this bar saying, I don't belong here, but I didn't know where I belonged. So I'm honestly praying. And then I joined a civic group called the JCs, the Junior Chamber of Commerce. And where they attacked the problems of the community, and they taught you leadership training programs, and they taught you how to serve on the committee, how to chair a committee, and how to get things done in that community. Wherever there were problems, we'd attack those problems, and we learned leadership through that. One of the biggest problems at the time was drugs with our youth, and so as it is today. So I wrote a drug education program teaching grade school children the ills of drug abuse with humor, a concept I had. And it was, I knew they weren't teaching drug education in those days at a college or a high school level, let alone at an elementary school level, but I felt like we had to get to the kids soon. So anyhow, long story short, I ended up proposing this as a JC project, and so that they would sanction it at a general meeting. And in that meeting, a young Black guy graduated from Norfolk State College in Norfolk, Virginia, and E.I. DuPont recruited him into Chicago as a marketing rep. And it was his first meeting. He wanted to join the JCs. And his first meeting, he came up to me afterward and he said, you know, I'd like to work with you on that project. But I told him, I'm sorry, I already got a guy. And as fate would have it, again, I'm praying at that time, what am I supposed to be doing in life? The next day, my friend, John DeBoer, a white guy, called me and said, I can't do that project with you. And he said, I got a new job. I said, gee, what was that Black guy's name? Oh yeah, Tim Reid. So I called Tim. We get together, we write the program, we rehearsed it and everything. We go into classrooms, and the moment we went in the classrooms, I saw right away how much it meant this was going to be a success, because Tim and I were so funny. We played off of one another, made each other laugh. We made the kids laugh, but the students were Black and white. And so we'd play records and get them laughing. And then we would, you know, start telling about the ills of drug abuse. The program became so successful in 50 states and in 22 foreign countries, JCs use it as a model program on how to teach drug education at an elementary school level, and through their publications. And one day, a little 8th grade girl walking out of the classroom said, you guys are so funny, you ought to become a comedy team. And the thought of a Black-white comedy team intrigued us because no one had ever done that before. So we became America's first Black and white comedy team. And history shows we were the last. You know, Tom was the name of the act. And those days there were no comedy clubs. So we worked all Black clubs in the North and the South. We worked all white clubs too, but we worked all Black clubs called the Chitlin Circuit, affectionately called the Chitlin Circuit, Black owned, Black operated nightclubs. And And then we'd work all white clubs. So I'd be the only white guy within miles, and then we'd work all white clubs. So Tim would be the only black guy within miles. And we paid dues like no other act ever had to pay. Some tough times, but we got through it all. And after 6 years, Tim wanted to split up more. He wanted to be more of an actor. And so the team split up, and I started to go it alone. That's how I got in the show business. Yeah. That's it. Tim and I were looking, we always took pictures like we're looking down a railroad track and the train was coming.
So was that considered, your collaboration, was that pretty revolutionary for the time? I mean, you're, the first biracial stand-up comedy duo in the United States. Were you well received?
Well, in those days, that was 1969. In the late 60s, I mean, Martin Luther King was assassinated. Robert Kennedy was assassinated in the 60s. The Civil Rights Act we were 5 years removed from the Civil Rights Act being passed. We, I think we went off screen there somehow. We're still there, right? Anyhow.
Just keep on going. It's fine. We're recording, so it's not a problem. Don't worry about it. Sorry if it's distracting.
No, it's no problem. But it was really revolutionary at the time. In those days, the students were protesting all over America because of the Vietnam War. And also African Americans were rioting in every major city in the United States, including my neighborhood, Harvey, Illinois, where I was born and raised, and one of the biggest riots in the country there. So wherever we went, it was really controversial. It was very controversial wherever we went. And the fourth time we were ever on stage, a guy put a lit cigarette out in Tim's face and then tried to beat the hell out of me. Wow. And I boxed when I was on the service, but he outweighed me by 100 pounds. It was just some redneck crazy guy. And then at University of Illinois, a guy hit me in the face with an ice ball, packed an ice ball, went out in the snow and came in and hit me in the face with the ice ball. It was interesting in those days about racism. If there was a black guy who hated white people, hated them with a passion, he wasn't mad at me. He was mad at Tim for being with me. If there was a white guy, redneck, who hated black people with a passion, he wasn't mad at Tim. He was mad at me for being with Tim. So we had to deal with that element. But 95% of the people that saw us like this, we just had that one tiny element on both sides that would once in a while, give us, a bad time. However, that being said, one of the things I treasure to this day, and so does Tim, that so many places we went, that wherever there was racial tension, that's where we'd go. We did colleges and high schools where there was racial tension, we'd perform. And we did 11 prisons in 1 year. By the way, that's a routine that's on that screen. That's a routine we used to do where I was interviewing the first black president of the United States. You think we weren't before our time?
Yes.
One of our lines was, I'd say, now that you're president, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to ask Congress to enact a law that dead people are not allowed to vote in Chicago. And then get a big laugh, And then I'd say, what's the second thing you're going to do? He said, I'm going to ask Congress to enact a law that live people are not allowed to vote in Mississippi. And then, that was some of the material that we did. But anyhow, so, I can't remember where I was going with that story.
And how many years did your collaboration continue?
6 years.
6 years. Okay.
I was saying, one of the things I'll treasure, and so does Tim, I can't tell you how many times a young black kid would come up to us after the show and say, I got a white friend that I'd like to be friends with. But if I reach out to him, the black guys the brothers are gonna wear me out with names. But after watching you and Tim, I'm going to do that. Then a white kid would come up and say, I got a black friend that I kind of like, I'd like to reach out, but the white guys are gonna call me names. But watching you and Tim, I'm gonna reach out to my black friend. People tell us they learn more about race relations watching Tim Reid and I perform than from any classroom or any book they ever read, because race relations are about race relations. You can't legislate love. The government can't force people to love one another. There has to be relations. And that's what they were witnessing, Tim and I, having relations. We were making fun of all the stereotypes, and we didn't agree on everything, but we had this great friendship. And that was apparent to the audience when they saw us, So, and like I say, 6 years of that, of paying dues,
I think you might have spoken to this, but just in case we missed it, I can't recall if you already mentioned this during our chat this evening. What were most of the clubs that you were playing at that time? Were these also segregated clubs, or were you playing before mixed audiences?
No, you know what? We were mostly playing the segregated audience because in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, but still people hadn't integrated, and there were no comedy clubs in those days. So like I say, we worked the Chitlin circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. And then we worked, like the Playboy clubs. But they were just barely integrating. You might in the Chitlin circuit, you rarely saw a white person in that audience. And also in the other clubs around the country, you'd see a few, maybe a sprinkling of black folks, but rarely did we ever, except when we worked a high school or a college, then you might see a more of an integrated audience, So it was a very interesting time. Again, there were no comedy clubs. So, we paid dues like no one else ever had to pay,
I can imagine. So after your 6 years with Tim, what, you guys parted ways, correct? What made you decide to stay in comedy?
I had my ex-wife hated show business, and I'm trying to think. My ex-wife, what was her name? Oh yeah, Plaintiff. But anyhow, she hated show business, and I don't blame her. She didn't marry a comedian. She married a guy who just got out of the service and was a working class guy, like her dad. Her dad worked in a factory for 40 years, never missed a paycheck. Every Friday there was a paycheck. There was food on the table. Now I'm in this precarious business. I had good jobs, but now I'm, you make $40 one night and you're making another 20 another night, and it was a very difficult time. So she wanted me out of show business. And when the comedy team finally split up, she was thrilled. She thought, now he's going to get a job in the factory and we're going to settle down here. But I'm sitting in a bar one night and the team split up, and I'm thinking to myself, what can I do? I was always real good at options, alternatives. I'm thinking, well, I can get another black guy and do the same act, or I can get a job in a factory and make my wife happy, or I could be a stand-up, go it alone. I wanted to be a comedian so bad. Can I digress for a moment? The first time that Tim Reid and I went on stage together, something I had written got a laugh. And that moment, it was like an epiphany, like all the dark clouds, like a B movie where the dark clouds open up and the sun bursts through. And my whole being went, yes, oh, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to be a comedian. The thought that you make a living making people laugh overwhelmed me. That you could make a living making people laugh. I was loading trucks and doing all these other kind of things, but I couldn't sleep that whole night. And I went back to when I went home, and I got and I couldn't sleep all night long. And I went to church on a Saturday morning. There was no service. It was a Saturday morning, and I got on my knees and I prayed. I said, God, I now know what I want. I want to be a comedian. If you let me make my living as a comedian, I'll never ask for anything else. I'll do charities. I promise I'll pay back, Lord. Just let me be a comedian. And and that was September 1969. 50 years later, I went back to that church, September 2019, and I gave a sermon on the Sunday Mass on the power of prayer. Mm-hmm. And I told the congregation, I knelt right over there 50 years ago, and I prayed, and all my prayers have been answered. And I explained to them the power of prayer. I'll get back to about me making my decision as being a single, but one of the things I told them is, I said, I told the congregation, have you ever thought about someone and you hadn't seen for years, and then all of a sudden the phone rings and it's that person? Has that ever happened to you? And you say, I was just thinking about you. And they would say, I was thinking about you too. Or you're walking down the street, you're thinking about someone you haven't seen, and you go around the corner and there's that person. You say, you won't believe this. I was just thinking about you. And everybody in the congregation raised their hand. I said, well, if human beings can transfer thought, and obviously we can, we all agree to that, well, then how much can a human being transfer thought to a supreme being? Mm-hmm. Someone who created the universe. So that's why I believe in the power of prayer, thought transference. Now, going back to what you're saying, now I'm sitting in the bar saying, what am I going to do? I could, get a job in a factory, please my wife, quit show business, get another black guy and do the same act we did, or become a stand-up alone. And I said, that's what I want to do. I want to be a stand-up comedian. I'm sitting at the bar with my buddies there on the bar, and they were getting ready to close the bar. And I said, and I started setting a goal. I said, I'm going to try to make it to the Tonight Show. In 1975, wherever you went in America, people say, what do you do for a living? You say, I'm a stand-up comedian. The next question out of their mouth was, oh yeah, have you ever been on Johnny Carson? So if you hadn't been on Johnny Carson in the eyes of America, you just weren't a comedian. So at that bar that night, I said, okay, that's my goal. I'm going to work on material, be a stand-up comedian, and my goal is to get on the Johnny Carson show. And I remember the book I read by Clement Stone, Positive Mental Attitude. It said, if you know what you want to do in life, and if it's a noble endeavor, search your life and see if there's anything that can deter you from that noble achievement and get it out of your life. Pursue your goal. And I thought, what could stop me if I wanted to make it as a stand-up comedian? And I thought, alcohol. I love to drink. I love beer. I only drank beer, but I love hanging out with the guys, drinking beer sometimes till 2, 3 in the morning. And I thought, you cannot be a sharp comedian going on stage with hangovers and stuff like that. So I said, I quit drinking. I pushed the beers across the bar. And my buddy, the bartender, said, are you through for the night, Tommy? I said, I quit. He said, for tonight? I said, no, I quit. I'm never going to drink again. He said, yeah, right. I'll see you tomorrow night. And I never drank again. And I set my goal. And I ended up going on the West Coast, left my wife and kids in Chicago. I told my wife, I'll be back in a couple of weeks. I'm going to scout some jobs out. But I went out there and I thought maybe I could make it as a stand-up comedian there, because the Comedy Store was the place on Sunset Boulevard where everybody was going to. All across the land, all the comedians were coming out there because Johnny Carson, one appearance on the Tonight Show, Freddie Prinze got a sitcom the next day from one appearance. So we all knew that was the stairway to stardom as a comedian. So when I got up to the West Coast, I had no place to go. I ended up staying at a friend's house. And then I couldn't stay there anymore. And when my ex-wife realized that that's what I was going to do, that I was going to try to make it, she wrote me a Dear John saying, this is your dream, not mine. I don't want anything to do with it. I'll never move to California. You know, now I'm broke. I have no place to stay. I ended up sleeping in an old Nash Rambler, a car where the front seat came down. And it was up on blocks. And I hitchhiked to the Comedy Store every night, begging to work for free. And I finally got an audition at the Comedy Store and got on. And then I became a regular. And then I got the Tonight Show to come and see me. And in the meantime, I had gone back to Chicago, had a couple gigs there, and I got my wife and kids to come back with me, you know. And now I'm auditioning for the Tonight Show, and I got it. And now I did my first appearance on the Tonight Show. They bumped me 3 times. Every time I went there, they'd run out of time, and they kept bumping me. But then finally, the moment of truth comes. 26 million people watch that show. And this is it. If you score this moment, you're on your way. If you don't, it's all over. It's all over. That moment in time. Whitney Houston had a song called One Moment in Time. And the lyrics are just so moving that your dreams are just a heartbeat away, you know, and all the rest is up to you now. If you seize that moment, you know, and so standing behind that curtain, about to go out in front of 26 million people, you know, that's my first appearance on the Tonight Show, you know, and I was behind that curtain, and Johnny Carson said, "We're back now. And I'm glad you're in such a good mood tonight because my next guest is making his first appearance on the Tonight Show." That one line, "I'm glad you're in such a good mood tonight," you know, because he set the audience up. And I went out and I had just a great set. I got 8 applause, and Johnny, you know, when I got done, I closed with this line. I said, "You know, you've been a wonderful audience. Show business this is my first appearance on the Tonight Show, and show business is a tough life. So if you liked me, just if you like me, and you're Protestant, say a prayer. If you're Catholic, light a candle. If you're Jewish, somebody in your family owns a nightclub. Will you tell them about me, please?" I said, "Good night, everybody." And then I went through the curtain, and the coordinator said, "Go back. Johnny wants you to go back." So Johnny called me back out for a second bow. And I took a second bow, and I never stopped working from that moment. The next day I was signed to William Morris. I was signed to a development deal, you know. But see, when you went on the Tonight Show for your first time, you know, what I want to explain to people is that this picture is about, you know, to America, you had arrived because you did the Tonight Show, but to my industry, you didn't arrive. So Johnny sat you down and talked to you. And Johnny didn't do that on the first time. He usually waited till 3 times to, you know, he felt like you had longevity. And so now when you sat down and talked to Johnny, then to the industry, I had arrived. And that but so
most of us aren't aware of the nuances of that.
Pardon me?
I said most of us aren't aware of the nuances of that.
Yeah, and because that's when you had really arrived. And from that moment on, all of a sudden I was doing Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Johnny Carson, Midnight Special, Rock Concert, Soul Train, American Bandstand. I was doing $20,000 Pyramid, Hollywood Squares. I was doing all these shows, and also touring with. I started touring with different artists: James Darren, Frankie Avalon, Mac Davis, Tony Orlando and Dawn, Smokey Robinson, Natalie Cole, Gladys Knight and the Pips, and then eventually Sammy Davis Jr. But at that time, I went back, to my hometown, and I did an album because, that's what Sammy Davis, God bless him.
What was it? Tell us about working with Sammy Davis Jr.
Well, before that, I'll tell you, I did an album in front of an all-black audience because when I would go on those talk shows, I would talk about growing up in Harvey and growing up in a predominantly black neighborhood, playing basketball on an all-black basketball team, playing football on an all-black football team. And I told all those stories. And everywhere I went, white people would say to me, do black people laugh at your material? Do black people laugh at your material? And so when I went to do an album in front of an all-black audience called That White Boy's Crazy. And I think you have a photograph of that. I'm not sure if Caroline has it, but anyhow, I did this album in front of an all-black audience, and then whenever there it is right there. Believe it or not, those are all people from my neighborhood. That's a cover of my album. That it's called That White Boy's Crazy because my whole life they never call me Tommy, they call me White Boy, and not derogatory. It was an affectionate term. They'd say, "Hey, white boy, come here. Let me ask you something," and even to this day, if I went back there and they saw me and they were arguing about a game we might have played, a football game, they'd say, "Man, I scored 2 touchdowns. White boy was there. White boy, come here. Tell him," So I did this album in front of an all-black audience. That's my buddy Gucci sitting down at the table. I talked about him a lot. That's Leroy and Tutu and Tyrone and Tony Salters. These are all friends of mine, Anyhow. So whenever white people say, "Do black people laugh at your material?" I'd pull out a CD and I'd say, "Give me $12.99. You can go home and find out for yourself." And then I went to tour with Sammy Davis, which was a great time for me. Sammy had a TV show called Sammy and Company. And I did that show, and I did that whole routine about growing up in a black neighborhood, and he fell off the couch laughing. He thought that was the funniest thing, and he took me on the road with him for 3 years. And to sit in the wings every night after my show, I'd go sit in the wings and watch Sammy. It was like going to school, show business 101, because Sammy would take command of that stage, like Frank did, but, take command of that stage, and he owned it when he walked out there. And he could sing. He could sing as good as anybody out there. He could dance better than anybody out there. He could do comedy as good as any comedian. He could do impressions better than any impressionist I saw out there. He could play the piano. He could play the trumpet. He could play the drums. He was a decent, nice guy. When I first went, we were working around the country, and I had never worked Las Vegas. We were working at the Mill Run Theater in Chicago, and he said, "Have you ever worked Las Vegas, Tom?" And I said, "No, but I've always wanted to work there." He said, "You opened there with me in January 1977. You're opening there in a couple of months with me." Now we're driving down the strip. We landed in Las Vegas. We're driving down the strip, and in those days, big stars didn't allow the opening act to have their name on the marquee. A lot of times the big stars just put one name up there. Like Sammy or Frank or Dean or something like that. But Sammy knew this was my first time, and he made sure they put my name on that marquee really big.
And I think we have an image of that.
Yeah, there it is right there.
Wow, that's a piece of history right there.
That's my first time in Las Vegas in January 1977. And now when we go in there, inside, the musical director, Nat Brandywine, said, "Tommy, you'll do 20 minutes and Sammy will do an hour and 10. We do 90-minute shows. We want people back in that casino." Now, comedians hated Caesar's Palace because it had a high ceiling and they served food in those days. So you need a low ceiling. Comedians want a low ceiling because laughter is sound. It hits a ceiling and comes at you. So you score better with that when you set your timing off of their laughter. That's why I loved it working. I worked the Sands Hotel. I worked the Desert Inn. I worked the Riviera. I worked at the Golden Nugget downtown. Those hotels had low ceilings. I love working those rooms. Caesar's had a high ceiling and they served food. The comedians bombed, just bombed. And now my opening night in Vegas, all the critics are going to be there. And Sammy knew that. He told Nat Brandywine, the musical, or the conductor there, he said, I'm sorry, he was the entertainment director. And he told him, he said, "No, this is Tommy's first time in Vegas, Nat. I'm going to come out and he needs a score. If he scores he'll always be asked back. He said, I'm going to come out and I'll do 20 minutes. I'll do 3 or 4 or 5 songs and then I'll be out. And then Tommy, you do as much time as you want. And then I'll come back and I'll close the show. And I can't tell you, when Sammy went out and started singing, the waiters and waitresses, they got to get that food out of there before the headliner comes out. When Sammy would go out and start singing, they start snatching food off the table of people who hadn't finished eating yet. You know, they had to clear that room. And by the time I went out there, Sammy had that crowd in the palm of his hand, and all the food and everything was out of there. And I would score every night, thanks to Sammy Davis. You know, it was it was so wonderful for him to do. That's the kind of guy he was. He was a generous, nice guy. He really was, and an enormous talent.
Mm. Mm. Now, you and David Letterman would also become close friends. Is that correct?
David Letterman, when the first time he came out to the West Coast, I was new out there too. But he rode his old pickup truck out there, and anyhow, I came off stage one night, and David was in the parking lot. He was his first night there. And he said, I really enjoyed your comedy. You know, I said, oh, what's your name, Dave? And we became friends, right? And anyhow, and from that point on, we became friends. But I want to tell you a quick story. He called me about a month ago. He said, you know, every time you do an interview or I do an interview and people say, how did we meet? We always tell the same story, that I was out in the parking lot, you came off stage, I complimented you on your act, and we became friends. I said, yeah. He said, well, it's a boring story. I said, well, but that's the way I don't care, it's boring. He said, from now on, let's tell everybody that you came off stage, I was in the parking lot, I stole some material from you, and you beat the hell out of me in the parking lot. I said, no, why would I tell a story like that? He said, because it's a better story. I said, Dave, you got 30 million fans. They're going to be chasing me through the airports and stuff. I don't care. He said, it's a better story. That's what I'm telling from now on. Now, 2 weeks go by, and he calls me, and he asked me if I knew the governor of Illinois. I said, I met him, but I don't know him. He said, well, he had a certain problem that he wanted rectified. It was some thing that was happening in Illinois. And I said, but I do know the president of the Senate. His name is John Cullerton. I'll call him. Well, when I called John Cullerton, he said, oh, I know what Dave is talking about. Tell him that we're taking care of that. It's all being taken care of. So I said, John, can I have Dave call you and you can explain it to him better? He said, sure. I said, oh, John, by the way, when Dave calls you, tell him the only reason you're helping him is because Dreesen beat the hell out of him in the parking lot at the Comedy Store. He said, okay. 10 minutes go by and my phone rings. It's Letterman. Didn't I tell you that's a better story? I told you that's a better story, you know. So yeah. David, that's the first time he hosted the Tonight Show, you know, and you know, I was so proud of him. He did 2 appearances on the Tonight Show and they asked him to host. You know, Johnny Carson saw in him from day one, he saw this guy that he belonged. And I'll be honest with you, I saw Dave as a stand-up comedian. He always made me laugh, but he was never comfortable on that stage as a stand-up comedian. And he did it for a while. He opened for Helen Reddy one time. He did some other things, but he was never comfortable. But the first time I saw him in a TV studio, I went, oh my God, he's home. Because, you know, he was a weatherman in Indianapolis and everything. He was comfortable in a TV environment. You know,
and was that ever something that you wanted to do?
Well, you know, I always wanted to be a stand-up comedian, first, last, and always. I love making people laugh. I love being in nightclubs, and that was, you know, I when I was a kid growing up, if you said to me, played a word association game with me, if you said love, I'd say mom. If you said baseball, I'd say Cubs. If you said show business, I said Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and Dean Martin. That was show business, you know, and I wanted that whole life, you know, appearing in clubs and stuff like that. But I have hosted shows through the years and it's fun, but I do enjoy stand-up comedy more. David didn't. And that's why David, all the years he had his TV show, you know, Jay Leno would go out and work Vegas. He would work all around the country. David never did. David, he didn't, you know, he didn't want to do that. He wanted to just host his own talk show. I did like 50 appearances on his late night show, The Late Show with David Letterman. In fact, he let me host when he had the shingles, you know, anytime he was sick, he'd let me host. I love that picture because I always made him laugh. I love to make him laugh.
Hey, you look a little mischievous in that photo. I'm not sure what you're talking about, but you look like you're up to no good.
I always reminded him of times when he, you know, when he bombed or something, you know, he hated to bring up his material. I would do jokes sometimes that he wrote, you know, and David's a wonderful, marvelous friend. He just really is a great friend to me. but he can't take a compliment. By the way, Frank Sinatra either. Some people just can't take a compliment. And I used to be that way. If somebody gave me a compliment, I'd hem and haw. I was in an acting class once in Chicago, and I did a scene, and a guy and his wife were a husband and wife teachers, and he complimented me, and I hemmed and hawed. And he said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "I don't know. I always have a problem when someone gives me a compliment." And his wife said, "Why don't you just say thank you and shut up?" I said, "Okay." And from that point on, somebody gives me a compliment, I say thank you, and I shut up.
I was talking to a gentleman the other day who happens to know you, and one of the things he mentioned, he I was sharing about the program that we're doing today, and he said, throughout Tom's career, he's never forgotten his roots. And this is a fellow Chicagoan. And, I know that Harvey, Illinois has figured prominently in your routines, and you always found time to go back home. Tell us a little bit about that, about your continued connection to Harvey, Illinois.
Well, I can't, whenever somebody, and I'm always complimented by that, that's a nice, he never forgot where he came from. But if you had 8 brothers and sisters and you lived in a shack and we had no bathtub and no shower and no hot water, we were cold so many times in the winter. My brother and I used to steal coal off of the railroad yard, and he'd throw it in a gunny shack and we'd run it home. We had a coal stove that in order way to stay warm, you had it in front of you and your back got cold. And, again, no hot water, we had to boil water to bathe and things like that. If you grew up like that, how are you going to forget where you came from?
Yeah, very
How are
true.
you going to forget where you came from? Anthony Quinn once said something that I never forgot. He said, if you were ever hungry as a child, really hungry, not hungry because dinner is going to be in an hour, hungry, and you don't know if you're ever going to have something to eat again. That feeling of hunger never leaves your subconscious mind. It'll stay with you the rest of your life, And so when people say, I never forgot where I came from, yeah, that's the Dreesens. When they named the street after me, I went back years later and the Chicago Tribune did a story and they had a picture of me polishing the sign. The photographer's idea, that's the street where I sold newspapers on the corner. And they named it Dreesen. Yeah, and the other thing too is I met years ago when I was in the business about 4 or 5 months, I got to do a TV show with a comedian that I adored. His name was Jack Benny. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners know who that is, but the young kids do not know probably. But Jack Benny was this marvelous comedian and a wonderful human being. And I spent the day with him. And he said to me, and let me tell you why I adored Jack Benny. Because I think a person is an artist in any endeavor when they make their work look one word, effortless. Frank Sinatra made singing look easy. You will be my music. You will be my song. You say, I can do that. No, you can't. He just made it look like you could do that. Jack Benny made comedy look easy. He made it look effortless. And it isn't. Stand-up comedy is a real art form and a hard job, but he made it look easy. And so that's why I admired him. But he told me when I met him on this show, he said, when he was giving me advice, he said, Tommy, where are you from? I said, Harvey, Illinois, a suburb on the south side of Chicago. He said, do routines about that. When you walk out on stage, if you ever go on the Tonight Show now, the Tonight Show was the furthest thing from my mind in those days. He said, you walk out in front of millions of people. Don't tell them about the government or the airlines. Tell them about you. Talk about Harvey, Illinois, where you're from. Talk about your brothers and sisters. Talk about where you went to school. So when you do 6 or 7 minutes of stand-up comedy on a national television show in front of millions of people, you made them laugh. But when you walk off, you left part of you out there. They say, oh, I know where his accent's from. He's from the Chicagoland area, Harvey, Illinois. He had 8 brothers and sisters. He went to Catholic school. He played basketball on an all-black basketball team. You left part of you out there. And I took that advice to heart. And he said to me, say you're from Harvey. I said, he said, where am I from, Tommy? I said, you're from Waukegan, Illinois, Mr. Benny. He said, how do you know that? I said, I've heard you say that so many times. He said, that's right. I'm the only comedian you ever heard of from Waukegan, Illinois. And you're the only comedian I ever heard of from Harvey, Illinois. He said, and there are more Harveys out there than there are Chicagos. It was good advice.
Very. Now, I know you had a very special relationship with your sister, and she inspired a project that you later did. Tell us a little bit about that.
My sister Darlene, as I told you, both my parents are alcoholic at one time, and my mom was a bartender late at night. My sister Darlene was 18 months older than me. I cannot picture a time in my childhood that she wasn't by my side. Even as a little boy, she'd hold my hand and help me across the street. She had to take care of the kids, my brothers and sisters. So when my mom would be working late in the bars and all this stuff, and she never complained. I never heard her complain. She went to church 6 days a week. We'd go to Catholic school, so we'd go to mass every morning before school. But then on Sundays, we'd go to mass. When I was an altar boy, she'd come to church. She was such a wonderful human being. I always say, if Darlene's not in heaven, there is no heaven. She took care of us kids. And then by the time she started to live, when she came out of there, she got married, and at age 24, she got multiple sclerosis. And I didn't know what MS was. It was 2 initials. I didn't know. None of us knew. And it took her from a cane to a walker to a wheelchair, and bedridden at one time. But and Darlene's been passed away now for many years. But I came home one time to visit her, and she was married at the time. I was performing in Chicago, and I went on the south side to visit her. And her husband was mowing the lawn, and he said, "Oh, Darlene's inside." And I went inside, and she had fallen aside on the wheelchair, slumped over, and she couldn't right herself. And her ribs were like on the wooden part of where the arm handle is. And she'd been that way for like 15, 20 minutes. This is a girl I never heard complain. And I righted her, and I got her, and she turned on me and she said, "Don't you ever come in here again, ever talking to me about positive mental attitude with your motivation talks. Don't ever talk to me about that again. And don't tell me about God, because you've known me all my life. What did I ever do to God that God would punish me like this? Come on, you always have these answers. Answer that question. What did I do to God that he would punish me like this?" And I didn't know what to say, because I never heard this girl complain. And so I just was dumbfounded. And finally, 5 minutes later, she turned at me and she said, "I'm sorry, Tommy. I lost my faith. Lost my faith." And I said, "That's okay, Darlene. If anybody needs to lose their faith, you do." But I went back to California, and I was jogging one day. I used to run a mile every day. And I thought, I got to do something to show her that I care. And not only I care, but a lot of other people care about her and all those with multiple sclerosis. So I came up with this idea. I'm going to run 26 miles. I'm going to run 26 miles, and I'll have people pledge money for every mile I run, and I'll call it 26 miles for Darlene. And we'll raise money for the cure for multiple sclerosis. So I brought all these celebrities back with me, back to Illinois. And every year I'd run 26 miles. I got the JCs that sponsor it, and I'd run 26 miles. And Frankie Avalon and Tony Danza and Frankie Valli and the Smokey Robinson and Eddie Marinero and I'm leaving a lot of people. The Chicago Cubs, a lot of the Chicago Cubs and the Chicago Bears, Jim McMahon, and they would all come and they would run part of the way with me. Smokey Robinson's the only one who ran all 26 miles with me. We raised a lot of money. And one day, after years went by, they had written a song. Frankie Avalon's conductor, Keith Drosty, wrote a song called "Don't Give Up." And it belonged to Darlene. And one of the years that we were there, we culminated in Park Forest, Illinois, and they had the Illinois Philharmonic on stage and 20,000 people out in front, and all the stars got on stage. And Darlene came out in a van, that special van, and they had her in the middle of the audience, and they opened up the doors and they were singing to her. The Illinois Philharmonic backing up all these singers, Connie Stevens and Frankie Avalon, Smokey Robinson. And I told her, I said, "Remember that day you said to me, 'Why you?' I said, I still don't know why you, but I know because of you, there's 20,000 people out there today singing to you." The audience was singing the chorus to her. They'd already rehearsed it. I said, "There's 20,000 people out there singing to you because of you." She said, "No, Tommy, not because of me, because of you." I said, no, because of all the love you gave me. All that stuff we learned in church is true. What you sow, you shall reap, and cast your bread. I said, all the love you gave to me and my brothers and sisters is coming back to you now, And anyhow, and something else happened that day that I'll never forget. A little boy came up to her and said, "Are you Darlene?" And she said, "Yes." He said, "Wow, you're famous." And he had a program and he wanted her to sign it, and she couldn't sign it because of MS. And that's why I've never, ever refused an autograph. To me, they call people in our society, baseball players, basketball players, football players, we call them champions. And sometimes they won't sign your autograph. We call them champions. But to me, A champion is someone who does their best when things are at their worst.
Yeah.
My sister Darlene was a champion. And if anybody deserved to sign an autograph, she does. That's why I've never, ever turned down signing an autograph or anything like that, because of Darlene. She still lives in my heart. She's just the sweetest girl in the world. She had a son, and I stay in touch with him. And he has 2 children. And one of the girls and one of his daughters' name is Summer Darlene, named after Darlene.
Beautiful. And I think if I remember correctly, there was a very special promo that you did for that project, the 26 Mile Project. Can we show that now? Or are you ready to talk a little bit about that?
Let me set that up before you do
Yes.
that.
Okay. We're going to wait.
I'm in Chicago with Frank Sinatra. I'm performing at Chicago Theater, which was, by the way, one of the thrills of my life. When I was a little boy, shining shoes in all the bars, sometimes I would take the IC train downtown and go by the Chicago Theater and try to get people to shine their shoes before they went in to see. The Chicago Theater was a big theater, 2,500 seater so there's an alley right next to where you see Frank Sinatra's name on the side. I used to stand off to the side and try to get people to shine their shoes before they went in or during an intermission or when they came out, because they tip better down there in downtown than they did in Harvey. And for me to come back to Chicago and appear at Chicago Theater, where I used to have my little shoe shine box with my name on the marquee with Frank Sinatra, was just, it overwhelmed me. But while we were there, we'd always go to dinner every night. Frank never went to bed till the sun came up. When the sun came up, he went to bed. He was nocturnal, whether we were on the road or off the road. But anyhow, while we were there, we were having dinner one night at Gibson's Steakhouse, and a couple walked by the table, a young guy and his wife, and they said, "Oh, Mr. Dreesen, we run in your Day for Darlene every year." And I said, "Oh, thank you very much." And they walked away. And Frank said to me, "What's that all about?" I said, "Oh," and I told him my sister Darlene has MS, and the celebrities come in and run with me, and I run 26 miles every year. And I jokingly said, "Frank, why don't you come and run with me?" He said, "I couldn't go 26 steps with you." He was joking. He said, "I ride a stationary bike." And he started doodling on a napkin. He said, "I got an idea." And he came up with this idea to help me out because he couldn't come and run. But he said, "This will help you raise money." And he did this, what they call a PSA, a public service announcement. This was his idea that you're about to see.
There we go.
Hi, this is Tom Dreesen. Each year Tom and celebrity friends run 26 miles to raise money for multiple sclerosis.
This year, lots of great people will be joining me, like Frankie Avalon, Smokey Robinson, Robert Conrad, Boom Boom Mancini, Connie Stevens.
So join Tom in Chicago Southwest suburbs on Sunday, July 1 and run for MS.
Sally Struzzles will be there, Tony Danza, Betty Thomas, Johnny Yoon, Frankie Valli, they'll all be there. We really need your help because we're going to keep on running until there is no multiple sclerosis any longer. Frank, are you going to run?
You kidding, I can hardly run this thing.
How special is that? How special is that this man that I love so much, that he would do that for me? This is the great Frank Sinatra, the career of all careers, but that was his idea. And he wanted to help me. I mean, that shows the friendship that we had. And I, afterward, Marianne, I couldn't stop thanking him. I'm saying, Frank, thanks so much. So he said, "Tommy, stop it. We do these things for strangers all the time. Why wouldn't we do them for friends?" And I said to him, "Yeah, but I know how busy you are and I didn't want to impose." And he grabbed my arm. He said, "Tommy, friends are never an imposition. My friend, you can't impose upon me." And that's a lesson I took. He taught me so many lessons. Whenever a friend of mine, if I do something and they want to thank me or say they didn't want to impose, I said, "Friends are never an imposition."
So you're now, you're at the top of your career, and how did you, feel like you, how can I say this, that you fit in with like the infamous Hollywood culture? Did you feel like it was a good match for your sensibilities, or, how did you fit in with the Hollywood crowd?
Well, I never, you'll notice that most of those people I talked about that came to Chicago with me, they weren't Hollywood people, so to speak, Hollywood people. These were neighborhood guys: Frankie Avalon, Frankie Valli, Smokey came from Detroit, Frankie Valli came from Newark, New Jersey, Frankie Avalon from South Philadelphia. I'm from Chicago. Dennis Farina was from Chicago. Joe Mantegna from Chicago. These were neighborhood people, Connie Stevens. So I gravitated to them. The Hollywood people bore me to death. Those who they come here and they do 2 sitcoms and they want a limo. Where's the limo? And then you'll ask them for an Oh my God, can I have a sandwich without you bothering me? They bore me to death, bore me to death. You know,
Tell us how you really feel.
so couldn't stand being around them. So I hung with neighborhood people like myself. You know, we used to have a group called the IMO, jokingly, Italian Men Only. It was Frankie Valli, Joe Pesci, Joe Mantegna, Frankie Avalon, James Darren. I'm going to leave some people out. Johnny Dark, a comedian.
Now, there were some women in there, I hear.
Yeah, Eddie Marinel. Yeah, we had Linda Mancuso, you know, and of course, Kay Avalon. We had a lot of women that would come to Italian women, but we would hang out. At first, it was just the guys. It was guys' night out, and then we started bringing the wives and the girlfriends and all that stuff. But
And some of the women brought the men and the husbands, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but we would sit up there and we'd sit in the back of a restaurant and we'd tell stories and we'd laugh and it was just a wonderful group. That's the kind of people I gravitated to, neighborhood people like myself. Yeah, they had great talent. You know, you're going to argue the talent of a Smokey Robinson, of a Frankie Valli, of a Frankie. These are enormous talents, but they weren't egotistical people, you know. And so I gravitated more to them. When I started touring with Frank Sinatra, Frank, when I stayed at his compound, I'd stay at his house like 6 times a year. He had this huge compound down in the desert in Rancho Mirage in Palm Springs area that had swimming pools and tennis courts and all that. But he had a main house where he stayed, but he had bungalows all along the outer perimeter. They were called New York, New York, Strangers in a Night, Tender Trap My Way, named after his songs. And the house guests would be Gregory Peck and his wife Veronique, Kirk Douglas and his wife Ann, Jack Lemmon and his wife Felicia, Clint Eastwood and whoever he was dating at the time. It would be Robert Wagner, Jill St. John, Angie Dickinson. These people were so established and none of them were pretentious at all. In fact, when they first met me and we became friends through the years, they'd say, Tommy, tell me about stand-up comedy. That's so interesting. You know, they wanted to know about you. I'm biting my lip. I'm pinching myself. This is Gregory Peck. I'm talking to you. You know, these are people I saw in the movies when I was a little boy. And they were just real people. They were so comfortable in their skin, you know, as to who they were. So that's who I gravitated to people like that, you know. And Frank introduced me to so, and we became friends and still are. Most of them are passed away now, sadly, but Robert Wagner and Jill St. John are still friends, and Angie Dickinson, and we have some good time.
Well, now I know everybody's wondering why we haven't discussed this already, but you know, how did you manage to tour with Frank Sinatra for 14 years? I mean, that's a huge feat.
From being glib at the right time. I was working with Smokey Robinson. I had toured with Sammy for years and the other people. And I was touring with Smokey Robinson and we were at Caesars in Lake Tahoe and Frank Sinatra was appearing next door at Harris. And his daughter Nancy was opening for him at the time. And so I wanted to see his show. Now, again, how fate would have it in my life. We were at Caesar's Palace for 7 nights. I could have went any night, or Caesar's in Lake Tahoe. I could have went any night to see Frank. For some reason, I chose this one particular night. I came off stage and I never even changed up my stage clothes because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening. I had seen him perform and Frank Sinatra created more excitement walking out to the microphone before singing a note. He created more excitement in the room than most people did with their whole act. You know, it was incredible to watch him walk out on stage. And I didn't want to miss that. So I come off stage and I ran. It's only a couple doors over Harris from Caesars in Lake Tahoe. And I was running in the showroom and the vice president of Harris Hotel, a man named Holmes Hendrickson, was out in front talking to a big heavyset guy with a cigar. And I was running in and he called me over. He said, Tommy, come here. And I reluctantly went over because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening. He said, Tommy, this is Mickey Rudin. Well, I recognized the name. That was Frank Sinatra's lawyer, very powerful guy in our business. And he said, Mickey, this is Tom Dreesen. And I think Tom would make a great opening act for Frank Sinatra. And the lawyer got a pained expression on his face like he heard that before a million times. And he said to me, and he winked at the vice president, but I caught the wink. He said, hey, kid, if I gave you a week with Frank, would you want more than 50,000? I said, Mr. Rudin, put it this way. If you gave me a week with Frank, would you want more than 50,000? and he started laughing. He said, I like this kid. I made him laugh. A week later, they called me, would you want to work 1 week with Frank Sinatra at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City? And I thought, yeah, I'll try to get my picture taken with him and I'll hang it in every bar back in Harvey and in Chicago. And the second night I was with him, I can remember like it was yesterday. He and his wife, Barbara, took me out to dinner And I was sitting across from him. We're having dinner. In the middle of dinner, he set his knife and his fork down. He said to me, I like your material and I like your style. I'd like you to do a few other dates with me if you're interested. And I didn't say, let me check my calendar. I said, yeah. And it turned into 14 years and 45, 50 cities a year. And one of a great friendship. And I miss him every day of my life. Yeah. That's, he was trying to teach me how to read music there. That was backstage at the Golden Nugget. He was trying to teach me how to read music there, you know. Then he said to me, "You'll never learn," you know. But he didn't read music very well either. But we were having fun backstage, and somebody took a picture, you know. That picture I treasure because he, and I'll tell you why later. Frank only once said, "I love you," but he'd always say, "Love you, pal," and he socked me in the jaw. "Love you, pal." He always socked me in the jaw. "Hey, love you, guy," and socked me in the jaw. I'll tell you later why that means so much to me, you know, toward the end of his life. But anyhow, yeah, that was backstage at the Golden Nugget as well. And we stayed together all those years. And you know, and when I first started touring with Frank Sinatra, he was the boss. He was the boss of this tour. We're doing 20,000 seat arenas all over the country, you know, Vegas, Tahoe, Reno, Atlantic City, but also 20,000 seat arenas. And he was the boss of the tour. And he was like the boss to me. Then he later became a buddy of mine. We became friends. I became a buddy of his. We became friends. And then toward the end of his life, he was more like a father to me. But the challenge every night to walk out on stage. Now, think about what I'm telling you, Mariana. There's 20,000 people, say, at the Nassau Coliseum in New York. There's 20,000 people in the audience. And now it's time. Now, I was, by that time I was touring with Frank, I was a veteran. I had done 30 or 40 Tonight shows. But I worked with Sammy, Smokey, but you know, biggest house is 1,200, 1,500. This is now 20,000 people. Now it's time to go on stage, and you're in, you know, you're ready to go on stage. And I say, Mariana, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go out there. There's 20,000 people out there in this arena, and they're all around you. They're behind you. They're on the left and right of you, and in front of you. So it's not proscenium like they're all in front of you. They're all around you. So I want you to go out there. There's 20,000 people out there. And I want you to hold their attention for the next 45 minutes. Oh, one more thing, Mariana. I want you to hold their attention, but I want you to make them laugh for 45 minutes. Oh, one more thing, Mariana. I want you to hold their attention and make them laugh. But I want you to make them laugh when you want them to laugh. I want you to pull the strings on the emotions of 20,000 people. No props, no tricks, no charts, no special arrangement, no orchestra, no nothing. Just you and 20,000 people. And by the way, not one of them came to see you, you know.
That's the story of my life.
But I had to do that. That's what you had to do every night. And it was a challenge, and I welcomed that challenge because he wanted you to get that crowd up for him. So I had a lot of tricks that I used to pull. I would go out there and when you're a comedian, if you're smart or you're a public speaker, whenever you got to get to speak, if you're going to do a joke, the first joke is on you. It's on you, some dumb thing you did. So the audience says, you got a sense of humor. A sense of humor, by my humble definition, is not when you have the ability to laugh at other shortcomings and misfortunes, when you have the ability to laugh at your own. When you can learn to laugh at yourself, you'll endear yourself to people. So I would go out, you know, first of all, in a huge arena, all the lights would go down, boom, and people go, oh, because they think Frank's coming out. The orchestra would be in the pit, bum, they go, oh, and they say, ladies and gentlemen, the comedy star of our show, Tom Dreesen, and people, oh, you know, I got to go out there and get them. So what I would do, I'd walk out on stage and I'd say, all right, I want you to applaud now. How many of you out there thought Frank Sinatra was coming out? Applaud. And they'd applaud. I'd say, I know just how you feel. I'm a little bit disappointed myself, you know, and then the joke was on me. But then I would say to the audience, because I've got to get if there's 20,000 people in the arena, 3,000 are still trying to find their seats. So you got to get that attention. You don't go into your A material right away. You got to get that attention to you right now. You know, so I would say, how many of you out there, I want you to applaud. How many of you out there are in this arena for your very first time? Applaud. And they would applaud. Notice I didn't say raise your hand. I said applaud. I talk, you react. I talk, you. I say, how many out there in this arena your very first time? Applaud. They applaud. I say, how many of you are seeing Frank Sinatra live? Your very first time? Applaud. They'd applaud. I'd say, how many of you out there aren't wearing any underwear? Applaud. Or they'd applaud. I talk, you react. I talk, you react. Now, when I got their attention, then I would do a couple jokes about the local area, jokes I wrote about that area. And then I'd go into my A material. But you first had to get them. You had to get them focused in on you. And it was a challenge, and it was a great challenge every night.
I'll have to, borrow some of your techniques for my next history presentation.
You got it.
So I think we have a few more images of you and Frank. Would you like to chat about those now, or?
Yeah, show me the image and I'll tell you. Yeah, this is at the Frank Sinatra golf tournament every year. But he made me laugh. He always had some funny thing to make me laugh. And I love making him laugh too, but he made me laugh. He had the weirdest sense of humor. His bodyguard, Julie Rizzo, had a glass eye. And of course, Sammy Davis Jr. had a glass eye. So one Christmas, Frank bought a set of binoculars, sawed them in half. He sent one to Julie and one to Sammy. That was it. But I love making him laugh, and he loved making me laugh. But I made him laugh so hard one time. This is a video I think you're going to show, that I made him laugh so hard, and I got to set it up for you and for the people listening at home. One time he was getting an award called the Will Rogers Award. For you old timers like me, Will Rogers, of course, was a comedian back in the 30s who was a brilliant comedian, died in a plane crash. But Will Rogers, his material that he wrote in those days still stands up to this day. Great material. But Will Rogers also once said, "I never met a man I didn't like." And that was just a great statement. I never met a man I didn't like. Now, Frank is getting the Will Rogers Award for charity. So everybody at the cocktail party and everybody before, and I was supposed to get up and speak, everybody is saying, Frank Sinatra's getting an award. I never met a man I didn't like, because that was a big joke. Because, Frank is volatile and he had a few fights in his day. So they're going, Frank Sinatra getting an award. I never met a man I didn't like. Oh my God. And then I had to get up and speak at the dinner. And this is what I said.
Okay, I think we can roll it. There we go.
Frank Sinatra punched every man Will Rogers ever liked. Getting that out of the way. I have been the opening act for Frank Sinatra for the last 6 years.
You can take that off now. Yeah. That cracked him up, and it cracked the audience up too. I love making him laugh because when he laughed, he had the bluest. He had everybody. His nickname was Old Blue Eyes, but I'd never seen eyes like they were crystal clear blue eyes, crystal clear. And so I just love making him laugh. And I enjoyed that more than anything in the world. That picture there was our 10th anniversary of touring together. I toured with them about 14 years, but that was at the Civic Opera House in my hometown, Chicago. Every year we go back to Chicago and work a different place. But that night he had a cake ordered, and it was for our 10th anniversary. And then we, afterward, he gave me a watch that I still have to this day. He gave me 2 watches in my career, and he had them engraved, but. He gave me a beautiful Cartier watch, and anyhow, yeah, but again, that was our 10th anniversary. There's another picture you had that I want to tell a great story about. That when you stayed at his compound, there was always festivities, all kinds of things going. I'm going to digress and tell another story before we get to that picture. The first time I stayed at his compound, when he asked me to come down there. Again, there were all these stars that I mentioned earlier. And I'm just at the cocktail party, the reception at the first night at his compound. I'm looking at all these big stars. Oh my gosh, look who's over there, who's over there. And the next day, he has all these people for brunch, all these stars. And he had the ambassador from Italy with him and the ambassador's wife. And Frank says in front of all these people, this big crowd of people at the brunch, he said, I'm going to take the ambassador to the airport and his wife. Who wants to ride with me? And in a second, that room was empty. The room empty. It was just me standing there. People just wandered out of the room so fast. I said, Frank, I'll ride with you. Sorry, Tommy, let's go. We went outside, and he had many cars, but he had a station wagon that Lee Iacocca gave him. And he said, Tom, you ride in the back with the ambassador's wife, and the ambassador ride up in front with me. And we're driving to the airport to a private jet out in Palm Springs. So we're driving. Now you leave his compound. There was a security guard at a gate there. And the security guard's job was to open up the gate, hold you there, walk out onto the street, which was Frank Sinatra Drive, and look for traffic coming both ways. And when it was clear, would wave you out. Well, the security guard opened up the gate, took one step, and Frank drove right by him, out onto the street, car slamming on their brakes, screeching sideways. Now Frank's driving to the airport, and the ambassador's wife looked at me, and this terrible driver, he would come to every intersection and he would stop at the light, but go halfway into the intersection. He just, when he wanted to go from the right lane to the left lane, he didn't put the direction on, he moved over. By the time we get to the airport, by the time we got to the first of all, when we got to the third stoplight, I realized why that room was empty. Everybody knew this is a bad driver, and come to find out he'd been a bad driver since he was a young kid, but he was just a bad driver. So now, by the fourth stoplight, she had her rosary out. She was saying the rosary because, Frank was such a bad driver. Now we get to the airport and we pull up to the private jet and out on the tarmac, and she gets out, and this little Italian woman, she said to me, "Do you have to ride back with a hymn?" And I said, "Yes." And she took her thumb and she made the sign of the cross on my forehead, Anyhow, on the way back, he's doing the same thing. He's talking and he's talking about the Count Basie band, and he's going from the right lane to the left lane. And he went from the outside lane to the inside lane, and he cut a guy off, and the guy went up on the center divide. And in the desert, these center divides, Frank was oblivious. He kept talking. I said to myself, "Oh my God, he just cut that guy off." As we're going a little bit further, the guy backed up and chased us. Now the guy's on the inside of me and he's cursing at me. He's on the inside and he's cursing, "You son of a," and I looked at him, I shrugged my shoulders and I went, I'm not Frank's driving. I just put, the guy looked and he said, "Sinatra, Frank Sinatra." And I nodded my head. He went, I know he could hardly wait to go home and say to his wife, "Honey, you ain't gonna believe who damn near killed me. Frank Sinatra damn near killed me today." But while at the house one time, and I think you had another picture, Frank Sinatra decides it's Easter and we're going to go to Mass. All the Catholics had to go to Mass with him. The Jewish guys.
We do have a picture of that.
Well, before you
Let's see if we can get that picture up.
I'll set it up first. That Frank said on the way there, we're going to read the gospel. I said, "Why are we going to do that?" He's going to say, "Let lay people read the gospel, Tommy." And Father Blewett wants us to read the gospel. And so we're all going to read a section of the gospel. And so I'm a former altar boy, but there's a lot of words in there that are hard. I want to read what I had to say. And anyhow, so we get to the church and the priest says, announcement on the altar, "Reading from today's gospel will be Mr. Roger Moore, Mr. Gregory Peck, Mr. Frank Sinatra, and Mr. Tom Dreesen." And the whole church began to buzz, "Who's Tom Dreesen?" So, and I had to follow Gregory Peck. When Gregory Peck reads the gospel, people say, "Didn't he write this?" He sounded so majestic, And then we were sitting up on the altar and the mass is over. And as you Catholics know, the priest will always say, "Go, the mass is ended." But he didn't say that this time. Before he said it, he said, "Perhaps some of you may have seen comedian Tom Dreesen talking about his Catholic school upbringing on the Tonight Show. Maybe he'll honor us with a joke." And Frank said, "Get up, tell him a joke." And I couldn't think of a joke. I got a joke to tell in church. I don't want to do your act or a joke. And I got up to the podium and I'm thinking, what am I going to say? And I remembered this joke. I said, back in the Midwest, many years ago, in the middle of Mass, the priest turned around and said to the congregation, "I'm the priest in this parish and I make $200 a week, and that's not enough." And moments later, the bishop came out of the sacristy and he said, "I'm the bishop in this diocese and I make $400 a week, and that's not enough." And up in the choir, the organist started playing. He said, "I'm the organist in this diocese and I make $2,000 a week, and there's no business like show business." And Frank cracked up and the church cracked up, and Frank said, "Okay, let's get out of here,
That's hilarious. So tell us, and one of the questions that we've been receiving from a number of members of the audience is, what are some of the lessons that you learned from Frank?
There's so many things that he taught me, and I mentioned a couple of them earlier, but that's a picture I've loved. A guy was doing a story on me at the Circle Star Theater in San Francisco about me touring with Frank Sinatra. Frank was in his dressing room. The guy was in my dressing room. He came out and he wanted to take some pictures of me. And Frank came out and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, this guy's doing a story on me, Frank." And he said, "A story on you?" I said, "Yeah." And I said, "He's doing a story on me." And the guy said, "Mr. Sinatra, would you mind taking a picture with Tom?" He said, "Are you kidding me? This is my man." And at the picture, he said, "He's my man," and that's why he took that picture. So I always treasure that picture, But he taught me so many things. We were coming out of the Waldorf Astoria one day in New York City. We were on our way to do a gig. And we went out the back way because if Frank went out the front, he'd be mobbed. And so we're coming out the back way, and the security was rushing the limousine. And a woman jumped out of the doorway, and the bellman told me she'd been hiding in the doorway for 5 hours. And she started screaming, "Mr. Sinatra, please, Mr. Sinatra, please." And Frank, the security got Frank in a limo, and the security was holding her back. And Frank, she kept hollering, "Please, Mr. Sinatra, please." He came out of the limo and he went up to her. He said, "What is it?" She said, "My husband is home very, very ill. He's terribly sick. And if you would sign an autograph, it would mean the world to him." And Frank said, "Sure." And he's signing the autograph, and he had on these very expensive cufflinks. They're like $2,000 cufflinks that I know where you got them at. And she looked and she said, "Oh, what beautiful cufflinks." He said, "Thank you." And he signed the autograph and he took the cufflinks off and he handed them to her. And he said, "Give these to your husband." She said, "Oh, no, 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 I don't want them. I just admire them." He said, "No, I want your husband to have these." We get in the limo and I said to him, "Frank, that was beautiful. But why did you do that?" He said, "Tommy, if you possess something that you can't give away, then you don't possess it. It possesses you."
Mm.
I said, whoa, that's pretty heavy. He said, Aristotle Onassis, who was a multi-billionaire, who owned private jets. He had private jets, he had private yachts. He had yachts and jets and mansions. The second he died, it all transferred. That wasn't his jet. That wasn't his mansion. That wasn't his yacht. He's only using it. Nothing we have, Tommy, is ours. We're only using it. He said, "You see that shirt on your back? If you die right now, tomorrow somebody be wearing that. You're only using it." And he not only talked that talk, he walked that talk. You couldn't say to Frank, "Gee, that's a beautiful painting." He'd take it off the wall and hand it to you. If you said, "Oh, what a beautiful watch," he'd take it off and give it to you. His friends had to be very careful around him, because if you had to be careful not to say those things. If Frank also taught me punctuality, even though I learned that in the military. If you ever said, Frank Sinatra, arguably the greatest career show business has ever known, this great Frank Sinatra was never late. If you told him to be there at 9 o'clock, he was there at 5 to 9, or maybe 10 to 9. But if you didn't show up till 9:03, he was gone. He always told me, "You have to respect their time, Tommy." He said, if somebody tells you to be in their office at 9:15 and you show up at 9:30, you just told them your time is more important than theirs. He said, so punctuality. And also I said to him one time, "Frank, why do we wear tuxedos on the shows?" He said, "Tommy, if we were going to do a show for the king and the queen, for royalty, would we wear a tuxedo?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "That garage mechanic in Detroit and his wife, who's a waitress, who work all year long to save enough money to buy 2 tickets to our show, they're just as much royalty as the king and the queen. And we dress for them the same way we dress for the king and the queen." Those are the kind of things that, that he taught me. The last lesson that he taught me was that it was in December, it was his 82nd birthday. He died 5 months later in May. And we were all over his house for his 82nd birthday. And all these stars that I told you about, Sidney Poitier and his wife Joanne, and Gregory Peck and Veronique, and all these stars. And we had dinner, and now people were waiting for the cake to come out. And Frank was kind of sitting off to the side. We didn't know sometimes if he was quite with us. Like I say, he passed away 5 months later. He's been very ill. And he was off to the side, and the woman, a Black woman that took care of him for 40 years, worked at his compound, named Vine, that he thought the world of. She was cutting up food and helping him eat and everything. And he was quiet. And we're making small talk, waiting for the cake to come out. And somebody said, "What do you think the best place to live is?" And Gregory Peck said, "Well, Veronique and I have a villa in France and we like it there." And Robert Wagner and Joe St. John said, "We have a place in Aspen and we like it there." And Frank, with his head down, off to the side, said, "The best place to live is where your friends are." And everybody went, "Oh yeah." My point of this story is, this is arguably the greatest career show business ever known. 3 Academy Awards, amassed a fortune, Grammys, all of that. And in the end, it wasn't about any of those things. It was about friendships. And that's the last lesson Frank Sinatra taught me.
That must have been incredible years. I'm sure you feel so lucky to have had.
Well, it was. I miss him every day of my life. I was a pallbearer at his funeral, and I spoke at his funeral. And one of the things at his funeral that I wanted to make sure that I knew he'd want me to make him laugh. You know, every night before I went on stage, I'd walk by his dressing room and he'd say to me, "Going on stage, Tommy?" And I'd say, "Yeah." He said, "Be funny and be brief." He would always say, "Be funny and be brief," you know. And at his service, I said to myself, I know he'd want me to make him laugh. And so that's what I was going to do. I was going to try to make him laugh. But at the service, when you got there, you know, and by the way, he told me many years ago, he said, I'm half Sicilian, I'm Italian, half Sicilian, half Irish. And he told me, when Sicilians don't cry in public, Tommy, they cry alone. I said, "Oh yeah." And he said, "Sicilians cry alone." I said, "But I'm half Irish." He said, "Irish cry when they change bus drivers." You know, that was our little joke. But at his funeral, I made up my mind I wasn't going to cry. I was going to do all I could not to cry. And I was going to try to make him laugh. Now, at his funeral, everybody who's anybody in the world was in that church. You know, now to digress for a moment, in all the years I toured with Frank Sinatra, whoever I took backstage, he never refused them. He'd always, whatever guest, I took my mom back there, how much she was melted, you know. I took nuns that taught me. I took congressmen, US senators. I took people that own their own corporations, heads of corporations. But I take a guy who was a bartender back in Harvey, Illinois, or drove a bread truck. And Frank was always nice to all those people, but he was especially nice, if you will, to the little guy, to the guy who drove the bread truck. He'd say, "No, tell me about that. Do you have the Italian bread? What kind of bread?" He always seemed like he made that little guy feel as important as anybody else. So that being said, now at the church, all the big stars from all over the world and everything were in that church. Outside were thousands of people that couldn't get in the church. And I like I say, I said to the priest, "When did you follow communion, Tommy?" So I had my daughter Amy with me. We were at the church, and now when communion was over, I got up early and I went up near the altar, and the lectern was over to my left, and now I was facing the congregation, but off to the side, and I was waiting for the priest to motion me. He said, after communion was over, and I looked at him, he motioned me to stay where I'm at, and all of a sudden got real quiet in the church, and the choir started singing Ave Maria, and when you go to a funeral, it reminds you of all the other funerals you went to, like my parents and things like that. So I'm getting melancholy, and I don't want to cry. So I'm saying, no, I'm not going to. I'm looking at, and I said, "Gee, they should paint that wall over there. And that window looks like it's cracked. You know, I wonder if they play bingo in the basement here." You know, I'm trying to get my mind on everything but this moment. Now that Ave Maria is finally over, and now I looked at the priest, and he motioned me to stay where I'm at again. And now the church is so quiet, you can hear the pews crackling, and over the speaker comes Frank Sinatra's voice singing, "Put your dreams away for another day." And the whole church burst into tears. I'm facing them off to the side. Everybody in that, from Tony Bennett to all of his friends, and his wife, his first wife Nancy, his Mia, and then and Barbara. Ava had passed away, or she'd have been there because Frank stayed friends with his exes. And by the way, another lesson he told me, when I was getting a divorce, he said, "Tommy, that's too bad, but stay friends with her. Stay friends with her." I said, "What?" He said, "Tommy, it isn't about you and her, it's about the children. Do it for the children, stay friends with her." And Frank did that with his wife. He stayed so close to his wife. But anyhow, now they're all sobbing. The whole church is all sobbing, and because he's singing the song. And finally the song ends, and I'm trying not to concentrate on the song. And finally the priest motions me out. And I'm walking out to that lectern, and I'm thinking, "You did it again, Frank. This is another tough assignment you gave me." But I went out. Frank Sinatra was so known for his tips. He tipped $100. If you brought him a cup of coffee, he gave you $100. If you brought him a pack of Camels, he tips you $100. A Jack and a Splash, his drink, he gave you $100. He didn't show off; he'd slip it to you. And there was the famous old story is that he was coming out of Mame San restaurant one night, and the valet parker pulled his car up, and Frank said, "What's the biggest tip you ever got?" And the kid said $100, and Frank gave him two $100 bills. He said, "By the way, who gave you the $100?" He said, "You did last Friday, Mr. Sinatra." Yeah. So everybody knew that. Now, when I go out there, I told everybody in a congregation, I said, "All of you knew that Frank Sinatra never went to bed till the sun came up. And a lot of you out there, like me, stayed up with him, till the sun came up. And that was fun for the first 10 years. But after 10 years, I was with him 14 years. I got a little old, but nonetheless, One time we fly down to Fort Lauderdale, and I'm telling the congregations, we fly down to Fort Lauderdale, and we're going to play the Sunrise Theater. But we were also going to do a one-nighter in Daytona, a one-nighter in Sarasota, and a one-nighter in Fort Myer. And then we were coming back and do 1 week at the Sunrise Theater. But the first night we had off. So when the jet landed and the limousine rushed us to the hotel, Frank got out of the limo and straight into the lounge. And I went up to my room. I said, I'm going to go play golf in the morning because I don't have to stay up till dawn. I snuck out. Moments later, they were pounding on the door, and a big redheaded bellman came. I opened the door. He looked like a linebacker for the Miami Dolphins. He said, "Mr. Dreesen, Mr. Sinatra wants you downstairs in the lounge." I reached in my pocket. I pulled out $20. I said, "Could you tell me you couldn't find me?" He said, "Mr. Sinatra gave me $100 to tell you he wants you downstairs in the lounge." Now I know my $20 isn't that much. I said, "Couldn't you tell him that you couldn't find me, please?" He said, "Mr. Sinatra said if I had to drag you down there, he'd give me $200. So this big guy said, "You're going with me." So I went down there, and the whole congregation laughed. I think they needed that laugh more than anything in the world. They needed that laugh, and they laughed. And I know that would have pleased Frank. And I was proud of myself that I didn't cry. Now it's time to carry his coffin out of the church. And when we're carrying his coffin out of the church, I'm walking by all these beautiful faces of people that loved him, the stars in there, and all the people. As we're going outside, you'll see I'm looking up. I'm in the back there looking up. Outside, that's when I lost it and started to cry, because there were thousands of people out there cheering. "We love you, Frank Sinatra. Long live Frank Sinatra. God bless you, Frank. There'll never be another one like you." And they're cheering and applauding. And I know how much that would have pleased him. That was the little guy that couldn't get in the church, but they loved him just as much as everybody that was in that church.
Well, as you can probably expect, we're going on about an hour and a half now, and I think we could probably keep on talking for forever. But I'd like to, if it's possible, share with you a few questions that the audience has posed to us. And of course, many of them pertain to your time with Frank Sinatra. The first is a little bit cryptic, and I'm hoping that you'll understand this. Tom, please tell the story of a dinner party at Frank's house when everyone was reminiscing about the place to be and Frank's response to their comments, which you just shared with us. So I hope that that viewer has received the answer to their question. But the second one kind of pertains to the nature of comedy today. How do you feel that stand-up has changed from when you started to our, the present day?
That's a great question, and the answer is simple: language. When I started out, if you wanted to make it, you had to get on the Carson show. Well, how do you get on the Carson show? We're in show business. That's the word, show and business. My business brain said, how do I do that? I watched the show and watched what the comedians were doing. You had the right material that could make grandma, mom and dad and the kids laugh. You couldn't say damn or hell. You had to write clean material. So that's how dramatically. See, in those days, it wasn't cable TV. When cable TV came on, you could say anything you want, and people did. But I couldn't have opened for Frank Sinatra, for Sammy Davis, for Smokey Robinson, for Natalie Cole, for Gladys Knight the Pips, for Frankie Avalon, for James Darren. They had family audiences. Mac Davis, they had family audiences. They want a comedian in front of them isn't going to insult people or use foul language. So that's a dramatic. It's the language, And now, speaking of that, I'll go somewhere else for a minute. About 6 months ago, I was at the Laugh Factory in Hollywood trying out some new material. I'm sorry, over a year ago, 6 months ago, over a year ago because of this COVID. But while I was up there, I was upstairs waiting to go on, and I was looking at my notes, working on new material. And there were two young comedians around the corner, and I didn't know they were there. And one of them said, Tom Dreesen is here, so my ears perked up. And they didn't know I was there. And one comedian said, "Oh yeah, he's old school." And the other comedian said, "What do you mean he's old school?" They said, "Well, he doesn't use the F word." The other comedian said, "He doesn't use the F word. What does he use for adjectives?" And I stuck my head around the corner and I said, "Adjectives." That's what I use. That's how it's dramatically changed the language, and women today are as blue, we call it working blue when a comedian works with off-color jokes and stuff. We call that working blue. Women today work as blue as Red Fox,
We can imagine that just as COVID has changed life as we know it, it's really impacted, obviously, the arts, the comedy world. One of our viewers has asked, has asked if you've done any Zoom comedy shows. I guess they've become more popular. How do you feel about Zoom comedy shows?
Well, here's an example we're doing right now. I've done that. A couple of corporations call me and ask me what I also give motivation talks, as I said, on perception, visualization, self-talk, and develop a sense of humor. And I elaborate on those 4 points. So I can do that easier. But for comedy, I've done it. I've done it for people, but they'll have like 200 people, a company or something, and they put them up in the squares on Zoom. But there's a delay. And we set our timing off of your laughter. So there's a delay. Even right now, like delay. So if you hit a punchline, you see nothing. You see faces staring at you. Now, 3 seconds later, they're laughing, but you might have already gone into your next joke because you're thinking, oh, that didn't work. So I can do it, but it's not like working live.
No, but, there's no substitution for that type of human interaction. I think we're all anxious to return to it. No.
Yeah, laughter is sound. Laughter, like I say, hits the ceiling and comes at you. But we set our timing off of your laughter. I can teach comedians, and I do a lot. I help young comedians. But there's one thing I can't teach you. I could teach you my technique, joke structure, how to write jokes. I can't teach you timing. You either have it or you don't.
Yeah.
Timing is when the laugh is on its way up, you never move on your next line. You step on your own laughter.
Yeah. I
had to learn that with a comedy team. If you move too quick, you stepped on your partner's laughter. So the laugh goes up, and on its way down, some nights I move, some nights here, some nights I let it hit the pond and go across. Each time you do it differently, but you set your timing off of their laughter. So on a video, that's not easy to do. By the way, what I'm concerned about, whether my business will come back in a long time, because people are now OCD. I don't care if the whole world gets vaccinated, and they won't. That 50% of the people don't get flu shots, so a lot of people are not going to get vaccinated, and people are not going to want to go sit. And for us to score, we need a full house. We need you shoulder to shoulder, because our energy is going out through that audience and back up to us, out to that audience and back up to us, like an electrical current. 5 over here and 6 over there and 4 in the back. You just took a scissors and cut that current, and we don't score. I can do it, but we want to score, and Broadway, they need a full house for 2 reasons. One, the actors on stage, that energy goes out through that crowd and back up to the stage. But they also need a full house because they need to pay the rent. You got to get that.
The costs are fixed or the same, whether they have, 500 people or 50, the cost of the show is the same.
And so, people are OCD now. They're not going to want to sit in an audience. Imagine you sit down and you a couple from Iowa, and there's a guy next to you going, he's coughing, and so they're going to get up they're going to get up and a guy sneezes, they're going to run out of the room. I don't know. It's going to take a long time for people to be comfortable.
Well, yes, unless we're willing to, wear our plexiglass boxes.
Yeah. And if you laugh and you got a mask on, you can't hear the laughter.
I know. These are interesting times, but we are alive. We're enjoying this day, and so we're grateful for that. So, final question: tell us about the book. Where can people find it?
It's called "Still Standing: My Journey from Streets and Saloons to the Stage and Sinatra." I could hold it up, but you probably won't be able to see it. Well, you showed it in the promo.
Well, yeah, unfortunately with a virtual background, we can only see a little bit of it. But if you put it in front of you, you could probably see it. Just right in front of your, there you go, now we can see it. Perfect.
Still Standing: My Journey from Streets and Saloons to the Stage and Sinatra. You get it on Amazon.com or at Barnes & Noble. They'll have it to your house in 2 days. It's doing, knock on wood, it's got over 150 5-star reviews. People are really, there's a lot of stories I told today that are in there, a lot of them that aren't in there. One of the things that I think you have one last picture. I just want to let the audience know that the very last song Frank Sinatra ever sang was called "The Best Is Yet to Come." he hadn't performed in 4 months, and we thought he might not ever sing again. And we didn't know, but he came out for the Barbara Sinatra Children's Center. It's a state-of-the-art children's center that treats children that are physically, mentally, emotionally, and sexually abused. And it's a state-of-the-art. Frank, that was his favorite charity because he felt so bad for these children. So no one knew whether he was not going to sing anymore, you know. And so he came out, and he was supposed to do 3 songs that night, and he ended up doing 6 because the audience couldn't get enough of him. They kept giving him standing ovation after standing ovation. And the last song he sang was "The Best Is Yet to Come," because that's all the sheet music Frank Jr. brought. Frank Jr. was conducting the orchestra. He brought 6 songs because he's only supposed to do 3. But Frank, the last song he sang was "The Best Is Yet to Come." And he came off stage and he looked at me and he said, "Don't put away that suitcase." I said, "Oh, great. We're going on the road," but we never did after that. And of course, that's the last picture you have, that's on his tombstone. "The best is yet to come, Francis Albert Sinatra." A very simple tombstone, you know, it's down at Cathedral City on the way to Palm Springs, you know, the best. And what I told you about when Frank socked me in the jaw all the time, he'd sock me in the jaw and say, "Love you, pal. Love you, pal." Well, now, after that night, we didn't know, no one ever knew whether he was going to sing again, you know. You can take the picture down, Caroline, thank you. But no one, we were all wondering, is he ever going to sing again? But no one brought it up in front of him. But he wasn't well, and so no one brought it up. And I'd go visit him at the home all the time and visit him. And one night, I was getting ready to leave, and he said, "Where are you going, Tommy?" And I said, "Well, my ex-wife is in town, and the kids want us all to get together." He said, "Oh, give them all my best, will you, Tommy?" I said, and then he said to me, he's sitting down with a like a blanket on him. He wasn't well, and I was standing above him, and he was sitting down, and he said, "Give them all my best." I said, "Sure." He said, "You know, I love you, Tommy." And because he never said that, he socked me on the jaw. I said, "Love you, pal." You know, it was like a guy thing. "Wow, love you, pal." But this moment, he said, "You know, I love you, Tommy." And I didn't know what to say. I started stammering, stuttering, and I said, "Well, love you too, Frank." And I don't know what made me say it, and I could have bit my tongue. I blurted out, "Hey, get well. We'll go back on the road again." And he put his hand on my cheek, and he said, "You're going to have to go on the road by yourself from now on, Tommy." And that's when I knew that he knew he was never going to sing again. And I left the house, and I was so sad. And I left the house, and Barbara came outside. She said, "Are you all right?" And I was kind of choked up. I said, "Yeah, I'm all right." I said, "But that hurt." And she said, "I know. Keep coming to visit him, Tommy. He likes to see you." I got in the car, and I'm driving home, and I'm thinking, Frank Sinatra is never going to sing again. That's the saddest show business news I ever heard, you know. And when he died, I went over to the house, and his Barbara called me and said, "Frank passed, Tommy," and she wanted me to come over to the house, and she asked me to be a pallbearer. When I left there that day, left the house, I was listening to a radio show, and a woman said something very interesting. She called in this talk show, and she said, "Something's wrong with my husband." And the guy said, "What?" He said, "He was served in Korea and Vietnam." She said, "And he didn't cry at his father's funeral. But today he was working, and he heard Frank Sinatra died, and he's come home, and he's in his room, and he's crying like a baby." He said, "I don't get it." And the guy said, he didn't get it, but I got it. Frank Sinatra, if you were a Frank Sinatra fan, his music was the soundtrack of your life.
Exactly.
You went steady to his music. You got married to his music. You got divorced to his music and sat in that bar all alone. And when he was singing, it's 2:45, and you felt the pain. You got remarried to his music. Love is lovelier the second time around. You know all music track of your life, even to "And now the end is near, and though I face that final curve." So if you were a Sinatra fan, as long as Frank Sinatra was out there singing somewhere in the world, you picked up the paper in the morning and you were in Portland, Oregon, and you read Frank Sinatra sang in Omaha, Nebraska last night, and you were a fan, you were as young as you were the first time you heard him sing. As long as Frank was out there singing, you were still young. And then, when Frank died, I said to everybody that all of us Sinatra fans, we know that the sun is going to shine tomorrow, but it just isn't going to be as warm as it used to be.
Yeah. The end of an era, truly.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you for sharing all these wonderful memories with us, all these fantastic stories, and you brought a lot of laughter to our evening. And the name of the book is still standing. You can find it on Amazon, hopefully one of your independent local retailers as well. You can ask for it and they'll order it for you. Support your local small businesses. Tom, thanks a million. We look forward to returning to the golf course with you soon too. And please, let's stay in touch.
I thank you so much. And I enjoyed our Italian golf tournaments and
Yes.
being with all of them. So La Familia.
La familia. Ciao. Have a good evening, everyone.